Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. A little bit of getting to know you. First off, just a little bit about me for those that don't know me. I mean, because as I keep forgetting that I started this campaign 2.5 years ago, and I got to everybody to know who I was, my background, my experience, and so now that I'm going into the new areas, I got to make sure that you at least get to know a little bit about me too. But I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, grew up in a blue-collar union family in Western Pennsylvania, and first person to go to college in my family, got a degree, first person to get a degree actually in my family too. Got a degree in business administration, got my CPA, went on to become a CPA, started my own business very early on. Came to Ohio with a few $100s, started a business, and quite frankly that business grew. And what I tell everybody, isn't it great that you can start in a blue-collar union family and live the American dream? So I'm very, very happy, and that's my biggest concern. The reason I ran for Congress was really I'm concerned that that possibility for the American dream is getting away from us. The opportunity for our children and our grandchildren is getting away from us. The other issues, of course, that we have is we're spending too much. Our debt is growing way too high. And we have career politicians in Washington who continue to believe that the more we spend and the more we do down there, they know more about, well, first off, they make rules that they don't have to live with. And that's a real problem in Washington. And, it was one of the reasons I ran. I think we need to get people in Washington who, quite frankly, understand that the rules that you make in Washington, you should have to live by too. So I'm very happy to be down there. After 14 months, I can tell you that I believe the system is broken. I believe it's full of politicians who believe, again, they have the right answers all the time. Now, what have we done in the last 14 months? Well, the House has done a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of good things. We've passed a lot of bills with no help, in many cases, of our colleagues on the other side, but sometimes bipartisan support has occurred. And we've got a couple things done. But the sad thing is, in the House, is that when we pass a bill, and anybody has those government classes back in high school, remember that you can pass all the bills you want, but if the Senate doesn't pass them, and if the President doesn't sign off on them, nothing gets done. So when you hear the President talk about the do-nothing Congress, what he's really talking about is a do-nothing Senate. And quite frankly, what you'll find is if you really look at the number of bills that we've passed over the last 14 months, we've cut trillions of dollars with the budgeting process, with the bills we've passed. But a lot of these things the Senate hasn't taken up. We've passed a number of job bills. We've got over 25 job bills sitting over at the Senate. The Senate hasn't taken them up. And again, we continue to go down that path, but if the Senate doesn't take up any of these things, we're not going to get anything accomplished. And it's the political game that continues to be played in Washington. Look, I tell people I'm not a politician, although I was the mayor of my community. I'm really a businessman, a father, a husband of 28 years. I have 3 children in college and graduate school right now. And the only reason I ran was to be able to go down there and make a difference. And I think that's the key. Changing our country and changing it back to where that American dream is still possible, changing it back so that our children and grandchildren aren't burdened with this overwhelming debt. The debt continues to grow, and we're going to continue, if we don't make a change, we're going to pass on something to our children and grandchildren that I don't ever want to be able to say I was a part of. Hopefully, I can be one who can say I was a part of changing it back. It's interesting, you hear a lot of rhetoric coming out of Washington. You hear the president all the time. You know, the other side continues to come up with all this rhetoric. All I ask you to do over the next 7.5 months, and I keep always saying, pull the curtain back and look behind the rhetoric, see what they're saying. Because when you pull the curtain back and you look behind it, you're going to see that most of them, you know, all they're doing is telling you bullet points, talking points. At least when you come to me, I'm going to give you factual information, and I'm going to base all my decisions on factual information. and I'm not worried about these talking points. So these are the real keys for our future. It's making sure that we send people down there that understand how important this is for our children and grandchildren. I know you have a meeting here tonight, your normal meeting, and I guess what I would do is open it up at this point for any questions you may have of me, any thoughts, any concerns, any questions about Washington. More than willing to answer those for you.
Questions, anyone?
Yes. This was the old congressional district of Dennis Kucinich, and there was a bill that he introduced when they were in the House. It's a Democrat, just looking at it as a bill, for monetary reform. His bill, it's House Bill 2990, and would nationalize the Federal Reserve, which is a private banking cartel, put it under the Department of Treasury, and then it would do other things. It would go back to the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, and issue greenbacks, not to borrow money and to go deeper and deeper into debt. The problem is not the debt, it's the interest payments that keep revolving over and growing up and up. We're at 15 or 16 trillion. It's a Ponzi scheme. This has actually been going on since 1694 when the Bank of England was created. And we're going up, up, up. And unless you change the way money works, you're going to accomplish nothing. And the only thing I see on the Republican side right now is Ron Paul, his issues, and their gold and silver and so forth versus, the Lincoln greenbacks, which is what Kucinich is doing. And I would just ask you, as a businessman, and you've mentioned 2 or 3 times, it's the debt, it's the debt, it's the debt. Why don't you look into monetary reform? Why don't you review the Kucinich bill and any other legislation, the Ron Paul, and see if you can come up with your own legislation to attack the money system and have real monetary reform. Otherwise, we're going nowhere. And if nothing else, you have to make your constituency, me and others, monetarily literate. Money is lent into existence. Federal Reserve notes are debt instruments. These Federal Reserve notes in our pocket have to have interest paid because they're based on bonds issued by the U.S. Treasury. And you answer for me, Jim, why does the federal government have to borrow money from itself and go into debt to itself? We need to do what Abraham Lincoln did to win the Civil War, change the way money works. Thank you.
Again, I'm not sure that was a question. It sounds like a statement. I'm a firm believer, look, as a businessman, first thing we have to do, you got to go back to basics. We have to cut our spending. We're spending more than you bring in. When you bring in $1.50 and you spend $3, you're going the wrong direction.
If I may follow, that is wrong with all due respect. Because when you cut the spending, you reduce the money supply. Our money supply is based on debt. You'll take us into a deflationary depression. You must change the way money works. What you think is true is wrong, Jim. And unless you start reading, get some advisors, review some bills, you're going to do nothing but take us in a circle as this country goes down. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I comment?
Sure. Sure, me.
Jim isn't the one who started it. He's there to fix it.
It's a good point. Again, been there 14 months. It's easy to say, everybody, and I got to tell you, everybody has their opinion of what has to be done, what needs to be done. You still have to cut spending. You cannot continue to spend more money than you bring in. Yes, we have a debt crisis. Yet we have an interest rate. We have an interest today that is being held low. When it goes up, the debt's even going to go up faster. There are all kind of issues going on here. But until you get your spending in line, we've got some serious problems.
I think you need to particularly cut the redistributive type of spending. It's ridiculous. There's all these entitlements. There's all these taking money away. I went to school for 8 years, and my husband has an engineering degree, and that's not easy either. And we're no better off than people that didn't even go to college. I didn't go to school for 8 years and get my pharmacy degree and work my butt off so that I could end up no better off. It's all of the redistributive of my income to people that aren't working. And not that they're not working because necessarily they can't find a job. They choose not to find a job. Maybe they just work half the year, and then the rest of the year they live off of my paycheck. I'm sick of it.
I would agree with you. We need to reform some programs. The Republicans, as part of the payroll tax cut extension in December, had reforms on unemployment. These are the things we need to do. We need to continue to reform some of these programs. I'm not disagreeing with you. It's part of the spending problem. We need to evaluate everything, and we continue to try to do those things.
It's got to be uncomfortable. I mean, it's giving out cell phones to people. I would have my life without a cell phone. We need a cell phone. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of government waste down there. Again, I told you, after 14 months, I saw it the first day I walked in, when they were moving furniture around from office to office, painting offices. I mean, in the real world, when you go into a new company and you start your new, no matter where, any of you that started in the real world, and you go into your office, you don't sit there and change colors, or you don't sit there and change furniture. You usually sit in the office, you get your job done, you move forward. We have so many even minor problems in Washington where we spend way too much money. We got to start with all of those things. And we can do that very easily by just starting to realize that we're spending way too much money.
Jim, can you talk a little bit about the campaign, if you would, please? Maybe some of the, like how's the fundraising going, and some of the campaign strategies. It's going to be a tough fight.
Yeah. Well, again, the campaign that we had last time was a very tough fight, but it ultimately comes down to me getting out, speaking with the people, making sure they understand who I am. I mean, campaigns are campaigns. We have a gentleman here filming, which is from the probably from the DCCC. So this is campaign. This is how it works. So what happens is he films what I say. And then they make decisions based on what I say. But I have no problem saying the truth, which is when I ran last time, we need to quit sending politicians back down to Washington. We need to quit sending people to Washington who have never made a payroll, never balanced the budget. Those are the kind of things that we do. We need to send people down who, if you go back to our founding fathers, they worked in their farms, their law profession, their whatever they did, and then they went down and they served the country. They made the right decisions. We need to be able to do that. So I'm going to continue to go down that path. And I'm going to always say that, let's look at the votes. Let's compare the votes. My campaign, I've only been there 14 months. My opponent's been there 6 years. I mean, compare the votes. And that's what I think this campaign should be all about. Well, my opponent voted for cap and trade. I've said all along, anybody that voted for cap and trade in the state of Ohio should never go back to Washington. Anybody who voted for cap and trade in the state of Ohio. Because we are an energy-based state where coal and oil is important. Now, if you're in another state, you may think different, but you're representing the state of Ohio. So I'm going to run on that campaign. The health care plan. The president's health care plan. My opponent voted for the president's health care plan. I've said that I voted to repeal it. Two different people. So the one thing about this district, this new district, it's a clear choice between two totally different people. My opponent voted to bail out the banks. My opponent voted for the stimulus. I've said all along, we shouldn't have bailed out. Look, I was in business for 28 years. Nobody bailed me out. And I had trouble. Everybody that's in business, everybody that starts out in the American dream, anybody in the business world has trouble. Wouldn't it be great if the government would bail you out every time you ran into problems? I mean, I think we need to realize it.
No, it would not be great.
No, I'm just saying, if you're in business, wouldn't it be great if every time you ran into trouble, you had the government to bail you out? But they don't. They don't. But they went ahead and bailed out the banks. They went ahead and bailed out, stimulus and all this spending. The government has decided to spend money on green energy. I say it should be all of the above energy. It should be American energy. It should be American oil. It should be American gas. It should be American wind, American solar, American nuclear, all those things. But we shouldn't pick winners and losers. The government does today pick winners and losers. That's going to be the campaign. It's going to be two totally different people. But what I ask you all to do is look at the rhetoric. Because what you'll see, and this is a great talking point for the other party, they'll say, the Republicans want to eliminate Medicare forever. That's a great calling line. And the truth of it is, there's if you think about it, there's only one law that has changed Medicare forever. It's the president's health care plan. He's cut $500 billion out of Medicare. Now, if the other side was here, they'd say, well, that's in Medicare Advantage. Well, guess what? Medicare Advantage is part of Medicare. And then they'll say, well, Medicare Advantage is where we fund private companies to do Medicare work. It's still all part of Medicare. The other thing that the Obama health care plan did was it set up a 15-member board, an IPAP board, unelected officials, to decide what health care that you will get in the future. So who really affected Medicare forever? I mean, that's what I want all of you to do, is leave here tonight and for the next 7 or 8 months and start telling people when they say that. Because I love the debate. Who really affected Medicare forever? Anybody that voted for the Obama health care plan. Now here's what we did. We voted for a budget that basically doesn't change Medicare and Medicaid for anyone 55 years and older. But for people under 55, it looks at it and it decides based on how much money they make, their needs and subsidies and how that Medicare, but it doesn't eliminate Medicare. In fact, if we do nothing, this is another thing that's so important. If nothing is done, outside groups, outside government entities have said that Medicare is insolvent in 9 to 12 years. So quite frankly, if we do nothing, which is what this past Congress has wanted to do nothing, they're going to affect Medicare forever too. So that's going to be the difference. It's just going to be getting people to understand the two differences. And then really what's going to be is getting people to realize that you don't elect people on 30 seconds commercials. My opponent will, my previous opponent, and I'm sure this opponent coming up, will find it that she's got to attack. And she's got to go and look at, it's interesting because I was talking to somebody today on the phone. I mean, most of the attacks are going to be attacks I've already seen. And then if they don't, they're going to have to make them up. But I don't put that past them either. I mean, my goal is not to come up with an attack program, it's to come up with a fact program. And the fact program will be, here's my position, here's my votes, here's what I believe, and here's what they believe. It's going to be an expensive campaign, there's no doubt about that. But, I guess that's what life's all about these days in campaigns. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish we could stand up and say, here's my position, my opponent say, here's her position, and then let the people decide. Because the one thing that's true about this race, we are two polar opposites. So you have a clear choice. And that's really what the campaign's going to be. Making sure people get that, know that, though.
Which committees have you been appointed to in the House?
There are 4, they call them A committees, B committees, C committees, and the 4 A committees are Financial Services, Ways and Means, Energy and Commerce, and I'm on Financial Services, so I'm on one of the 4 A committees. When you're on a committee, they changed the rules where you can only serve on A committees. I would love to be able to have served on the Budget Committee and a few other committees, but the way they have it now, if you serve on an the other one's appropriations. So those are your 4 committees. So when you're on one of those 4 committees, you can't serve on any other committee. So I'm on Financial Services. I'm on 2 subcommittees of Financial Services. One of them is the Financial Institutions Subcommittee. I'm vice chair of that subcommittee. And the other subcommittee is Oversight. It's another important thing we're doing in Washington. The previous Congress had little, if no, any oversight. We have oversight committees that are continually looking at different things and doing oversight. That's why, if you notice, we've been doing a lot of oversight on MF Global. That's one of the things. We've had 3 hearings on that already. This Congress will continue to do oversight across the board.
Jim. Yeah. The young lady back here has it exactly right. I'm not saying all of these people that are on the 99 weeks of unemployment are alike. A good many of them don't want to work. These are the people that we have to weed out. We've got to find a way to stop this give me. Even back to Obama's campaign, when woman said, where's he gonna get the money? And her answer was, from his stash. Where does the stash come from? That's our money. And I think the people don't want to understand that anytime any money is spent, it's not the president's money or your money, it's the people's money. And they don't want to understand that. They don't want to believe it. And we see that locally here in Parma, believe me.
Well, I agree with you. Look, when I was mayor of my community, I used to tell everybody, no matter what we do, we have to understand that we have the, not only a privilege, but we have to be very careful to honor and respect the citizens of the city and their money and make sure that we spend it in the right way. That's one of the problems with our politicians. See, I truly don't believe, I'm a businessman who's become a public servant in the last 14 months in Congress. I don't believe I'm a politician because politicians will tell you, they'll tell you political statements, and then they'll try and live behind them. I mean, the facts are that we're spending money we don't have. 40 cents of every dollar we have to borrow. Those are facts. And but I am a firm believer in taking care of the safety net. When you talk about, there is a safety net. There are people that need Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare, unemployment, all of those things. I believe in that safety net, but I also believe that we need to make sure that only the people that need to be on the safety net wagon. I don't know if you ever heard the story about, the wagon with the safety net. You put the people; those are the people that should be on the wagon. Everybody else should be pulling. The problem is, over the last so many years, people are jumping on the wagon. Let's face it; you can probably think of neighbors, family members. I mean, I've got family members that have jumped on the wagon that shouldn't be on the wagon. We need to make sure that if you can get out and pull, you're out pulling, but at the same time, we need to make sure that those that need to be on the wagon are on the wagon and taken care of. So,
Congressman, I want to know, how are you guys going to proceed in that oversight committee holding Obama's feet to the fire on things like Solyndra? I'm not sure if that's in your domain there. You mentioned MF Global. But these things that are being proven that he's done in the lies and the crony capitalism, how's this going to proceed? Are we going to get anything done against him?
well, keep in mind that we're in a country that follows the rule of law. We are continuing to do oversight, but oversight takes time, just like MF Global. We've had 3 hearings. By the way, I'm not on the hearings on Solyndra. That's another committee. But, we need to continue to go down the path of oversight until we get to a point where we can make decisions. I think that's what's going on right now. You think of Fast and Furious, those things are still under oversight investigation. And it's slow. We subpoenaed somebody on MF Global last week, and she pleaded the 5th. So we got absolutely nowhere. This is one of the people who actually made the transfers of cash. We thought we'd hear some information from her. She pleaded the 5th. So those are the kind of things we need to continue to move forward on.
Congressman, what can you do to rein in the EPA? It is it's riding roughshod. In our area, a lot of people don't realize yet that we were forced to an agreement for a $3 billion project, which is going to, the head of the project himself said, well, overruns, it'll probably be $10 billion. That's going to increase our sewage fees and probably the water too. I mean, we won't be able to live with that. It's terrible.
Well, again, what I can tell you is this Congress has passed a number of bills to rein in EPA. One of them, we cut their budget. We've actually passed a bill that says for whatever the EPA, if the EPA proposes a regulation, they have to come back and justify the economics of that. Tell us what it's going to do. And remember, all those bills get passed, and the Senate doesn't take them up. So, as a member of the House, we can continue to do that, but we really have to get the Senate to do the same thing. That's what's so sad about this. I mean, everybody in government class knows. I mean, how do you fix this? You got to fix the Senate. You got to change the Senate. You got to get the Senate to start engaging, even if they don't agree. Nobody's saying that the Senate has to take a House bill and agree with it. But how about picking it up and either saying, I disagree, or changing it, or coming up with something else. One thing that everybody in this room should be disturbed at is that the Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 1,000 days. Now, if you think about that. By the way, the House passed a budget this year, and it passed a budget last year, but previous 2 years it didn't pass a budget either.
Right.
Now, here's what's interesting about a budget, too, and it's important that I explain that. When you pass a budget, you're passing a blueprint. I'm going to get past the rhetoric, because what you'll hear, a lot of people, when you hear this rhetoric, and please take this information and take a look at it, verify it, what you're going to find out, a budget is a blueprint for 10 years. But the Congress has to pass a budget every year. So even though we pass a blueprint for 10 years, it's a guide for the next 10 years, the next Congress next year passes another budget and another guide. So when you hear the other side say that the Republicans passed something, they passed a blueprint. But really what they passed is a 1-year budget with a 9-year blueprint. And keep that in mind. The Senate hasn't even done that. And until the Senate can take our budget up, look at it, disagree with it, they haven't done that. Another thing that's interesting about the budgets, I'll give the President of the United States credit, since he's now put out 2 budgets. Last year he put out a budget. It went to the Senate. Does anybody in this room know how many votes it got?
No votes.
0. The Senate, 0. This year, the President put out another budget. I give him credit for it. It was a terrible budget, but he put out a budget. It increases taxes by $1.9 trillion, increases spending by $1.5 trillion. But he'd tell you that it saves $400 billion to the deficit. Again, talk about pulling the curtain back and getting the true information. That's the true information. So that budget, the Senate wouldn't even touch this year. So the House took it up 2 weeks ago. Does anybody know how many yes votes the House gave? 0. 412 or 13 no votes. So if you think about it, at least the House budget is getting you have to get 217 votes to pass. It's getting more than 217 votes. And that's what's important. We're making progress. It doesn't mean that somebody else can come up with another budget like the Senate. I think you have a question.
Yeah, why can't you just create a bill that says the EPA can't regulate carbon? That it's not considered a dangerous carbon dioxide, which we all read out every day. It's wrong using your voice.
Let's say we did that. And let's say it passed. Doesn't mean anything because the Senate has to take up.
Maybe the Senate maybe turns. Maybe they will pass
Well,
it.
when the Senate turns, we can take a look at it. But remember, right now, we're not even going that far. We're saying before you do any more, before the EPA does any more regulations, overreaching regulations, tell us the effect of it. And we can't get that passed out of the Senate.
Jim, first I want to tell you that I really thoroughly enjoyed having your son Drew with me as a poll observer in the last general election. It was terrific. We went all over the city together. He's a good guy. You may have said this, I don't think I heard it if you did, and I heard it in another place, but I forgot the figure. How many bills has the House passed and sent over to the Senate without any action from the Senate? I know it's in the hundreds, but I can't remember.
Yeah, and I don't have the exact number, but it's 25 to 30 jobs bills.
We're not talking 5 or 6 bills. We're talking about a ton of bills that went over.
Right. There's a tremendous amount of bills that are sitting there. The problem is when you're being filmed, whatever number you put out there, then they'll say. So I don't know the exact number. But I'm getting good at this because my friend here shows up at all my meetings.
Congressman, I'm Councilwoman Mary Venus in Parma. Welcome to the City of Parma officially. Thank you for being here. I don't consider myself a politician either. I'm a public servant, as are you, I'm sure. Thank you, Marty. You know what? I think there's a lot of frustration among generally the taxpayers out there in regard to Congress, Senate being elite, and health care plans and benefits, and not that the City of Parma is an example, but we do have a furlough program, like many cities do, where, you know, the staff, the employees are taking some time off, getting, you know, closing down City Hall, which I don't agree with, but even the elected officials that are voluntarily getting some money back. This is probably pretty popular as far as taking a little bit of a cut out of our pockets, because you know, I'm probably one of the lowest paid employees at City Hall, being a part-time council person, but I think if yourself, other congressmen, senators would enact some type of great act to cut the budget with some of the expenses that are out there just to run government, I think people would be ecstatic to see that, because I think we all feel that government is so top-heavy and there's so much money just to create the wheels to move. And then, as you're saying, you work and you work and you work, and yet nothing gets done because you have the other side, the other arm that doesn't want to cooperate and put the hands together and make it happen. So, boy, if there'd be a way to do something in that regard, I think you guys would be heroes if a bunch would get together and coordinate something. Because I think a lot of us think there's so much waste, and I know I hear it, they think it happens at City Hall, and I know it does. I know it does in some cases, but federal government is awesome.
Well,
just your thoughts.
And again, if you really look at what we've done in the House, we passed a bill to cut all of our budgets by 5%. We then came back and passed another bill to cut it by an additional 6%. So we've cut our own budgets by 11%. The Senate didn't take it up. So those are the kind of things. So what can you do? If you can't get it done, by vote, then you got to do it on your own. One thing I'm very proud of, and I don't remember the exact number, but when we all have our own budgets, I turned back in a few $100,000 last year. I ran my office like I wish all Congress people would run their office. You know, we looked at it, I ran it, what can we live with, what we can't live with, and let's start to spend, you know, if everybody in Congress turned back, and again, I think it was $200,000, I don't remember the exact amount of money, but if everybody turned back the same amount as I turned back, just think what we could have done in the future. I'm sorry? Budgets, it depends on where you're at in the country. It's about 1.3 million, and that includes everything. That's all your staff, that's 2 offices, that's your travel, that's your pay, that's everything. By the way, the other thing I think that factually, that if you don't know, you should hear, because, and I give credit to a previous Congress many years ago. This wasn't anything we did. You know, a lot of people say, well, when you're elected, you get, I always hear this. In fact, somebody called me the other day and said, now that you're elected, I should run for one day so I can get a full set of retirement benefits for life. I'm going, and they go, and I can get health insurance for life. Well, there was a Congress many years ago. I don't know whether it was a Democrat or Republican Congress. They changed that. You know, we don't get health care for life anymore. We don't get, and I'm not complaining. I'm just telling you, we don't get health care for life. We don't get this pension plan for life. We have a 401k plan. We contribute to a 401k plan. You know, it vests after 5 years, I think. It's pretty much similar to what corporate America has now. So I'll give some Congress back at some point in time credit for doing that. I think it was all the way back in 1984. So when people say you get a retirement for life, you get health care for life, I mean, my health care plan today is not as good as my health care plan was in my own business before. And I have to pay, and I'm not complaining, these are just facts. So I'd love to make sure you hear the facts. I have to pay $592 a month for my health insurance. So, when I say that, it's because there's so many people out there calling me up and they're complaining and they're hollering, you get health care free, you get health care. Well, and our health care is a private health care. We use private health care, and we select. So,
I can't believe the representatives, senators and representatives believe that the debt is a good thing. Do they choose not to do something about it because it might cost them being reelected?
well, look, one thing I've learned in Congress is everybody has their opinions. And there was, and I always remember one of my first meetings with a member from the other side. And I tell people this because it was a learning lesson for me. I walked up to a guy who'd been around for 20 years. Some of you have heard the story, because it really was a shocking story to me. Walked up to a guy, been around for 20 years, put out my hand, and I said, he's from the other side, Democrat, and I said, you've been around for 20 years, I'm a new guy. You've got to have some knowledge. Maybe I can learn from you, and maybe we can work together, because clearly we're spending too much money, and our debt's growing too fast. So I said, so what do you think the answer is? And I'll never forget the answer, because it kind of shocked me. He said, when you morons get out of the way, we'll fix things. When I heard that, at first I was a little taken back, but then I realized this guy's been elected for 20 years. The people in his district believe that. They probably believe that, the district I represent and that I'm a moron. I mean, that's what he said. They're electing him. So I walked away with it was actually a learning lesson. I've learned so much in my lifetime from just listening to people. This guy really believes that we're not spending enough and the taxes are too low. And he's one of 435 people. So if you think about it, that's what we have in Washington. So it was a good lesson for me, although I don't agree with him. But it tells you that there are 435 representatives, and what we really have to start doing is looking at where we can start working together. So one of the things that happened with me, because I don't believe in throwing stones at the other side, and I think the reputation I have in Congress is there's no use me throwing a stone at the other side, because we're down there to get things fixed. We're all Americans, we're trying to get things fixed. So I had one of the members from the other side come over to me and say, in my hearings, well, you know what I've noticed? You don't throw stones at the other side. You're really concerned about getting to the witnesses, to learning for what the witnesses have to say. And I said, exactly, because that's why you have witnesses. Let's listen to what they have to say. And he says, and I feel like you're somebody I can work with. I thought, wow, this is pretty good. So I said, well, let's have breakfast. And we did. And he and I had breakfast. And after he and I were talking, I realized there's a guy on the other side that's saying a lot of the same things I'm saying. So I said, do you have any people that think the same way you do? And of course he said, yeah. And I said, well, so do I. So that next breakfast, we had another breakfast with 6 people, then another breakfast with 12. We now have a group that gets together, about 18 people, and we talk about ways we can work together. Now what I found is that core of 18 people, Republicans and Democrats, they believe we're spending too much. They believe our debt's growing too fast. They may disagree on how to get there, how to fix it, but at least they agree on that. So I tell you that because for me, over these last 15 months, I've really learned something. You're not going to convince 435 people. And you're going to have people who are going to disagree 100% with what you say. That's okay. We need to just get 218 people saying the same thing.
How are we ever going to improve things when we're constantly battling a law of ignorance and stupidity? And it exists not only in D.C. but everywhere. But somewhere, somehow, at the D.C. level, we've got to attack that.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you this. I always remember, look, I was a businessman for 28 years. I was the president of my city council. In Wadsworth, you're elected to president of city council. The reason I ran for city council and then mayor is because I was asked to try and balance the budget. And my first thought was, the way to balance the budget was to become president of city council, get control of the finance committee, understand what's going on in the finances. Once I did that, I realized that that's great, but once you become mayor, you can then direct the decisions and then get council, convince council to go with you. And my city council was partisan, it was Republicans and Democrats, but I used to always say in the city council meetings, we shouldn't be here legislating common sense, but we do. And that's the sad thing. And we waste time in city government on ordinances, in many cases, about cats that are loose and dogs that are loose, and all these things that are important to the citizen, the normal citizen, but if you think about it, a lot of times it's just common sense. And it was always problematic for me because I always said, we shouldn't be legislating common sense, but we do. Now take that to a bigger plane in Washington, and yes, you're right, we do have problems.
I know you're gonna get out of here. I'd like to say one thing. There's a gal named Ann Barnhart, and I read her stuff. She's pretty upset about what's going on. She had started a business in Denver. Basically, she finances the farmers, okay? There's a page up here. She's got an article on MF Global. She's been writing a lot of stuff on MF Global. And the only reason for mentioning this is because I have taken this stuff. I have a friend who wrote the budget for Rudy Giuliani when he became mayor that got New York out of default. And I send him this stuff. I cut it out and paste it in an email and send it to him, and I say, is she right? Whenever it's financial stuff like this, he always comes back and says she's 100% right. When it's other stuff, he says she's far out in the ozone layer. So basically what she's saying is that the MF Global is a barometer of the condition of the whole financial system. And somebody needs to really get on top of this fast if we're going to turn things around. I'm really glad you're working on it, the fact that you mentioned it, but I thought you might be interested in having your staff take a look at some of Ann's comments on MF Global. I thought they were pretty interesting.
Well, keep in mind, the oversight that we're doing on MF Global is really to try and make sure we understand what happens so it doesn't happen again. That's the key.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, a lot of people think we're trying to go after Corzine, and no, the answer is Corzine's already got his problems with the legal system. Right now, we want to make sure that we don't let the same things happen that happened with him happen again. But isn't it interesting? I mean, to divert a little bit on the MF Global. I mean, for me, it was pretty easy of what happened at MF Global. There was a total lack of internal controls. You had a gentleman there by the name of Corzine who could literally make trades and nobody could stop him, other than the board. And he was chairman of the board. So if you think about that, those are problems within the company that occurred. And we need to make sure those kind of things don't happen in the future. So.
Question, Congressman?
Sure.
Two questions. The first one is, you talked about your group of 18 representatives. Are they from Ohio or just from
all over the country?
My other question is the internet tax issue. That kind of interests me, and I was wondering where you stood on that, or if you're involved in it at all.
Keep in mind, and it's a good question, because a lot of these bills, remember how a bill works. It starts in a subcommittee. Anybody can introduce a bill. It goes to a subcommittee. It usually gets sent to a subcommittee. It may never move anywhere. So a lot of times I'll get a phone call and they'll say, tell me about this bill, or what's your position on that bill or this bill? And the way I always look at it, if I tried to follow every bill that gets submitted, that's all I'd be doing. What I try and do is let it come through the process, see where it's at, and then when it gets to committee, remember it goes to subcommittee, and then it's usually addressed through hearings. And then it will go to the full committee, and then it's addressed, and then it comes to the House. So there's a number of places that you can learn about a bill. So when it comes to those type of things, I wait till they get further up the channel, because a lot of times, why waste your time on something that's just been submitted?
Has it come up that far yet? Or
No.
I've heard some news coverage on it. That's all I'm asking.
Well, what happens is people pick up on the bills that are being submitted. A lot of times, there's a bill submitted, and somebody will say, what do you think about it? And then I'll research it, or my staff research, and I'll find out it was just submitted. It's not going to. Sometimes they're submitted with only one sponsor. They don't even have a co-sponsor, which means it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, if I can give you some sentiment from a constituent, and you may agree with me on this or may not, but it seems like every time there's an opportunity, something new comes up, Congress, or someone in Congress, sees a new opportunity for a new tax, for a new opportunity to pull tax money from the voters. And, you know, to me, it's ridiculous. As if the government can never do with enough or without enough taxes or enough money. And that's why when I heard some news coverage on this, it was an interesting issue, because I believe the news report says someone in Congress said that, oh, we're just leaving all this money on the table. Well, really, we're not leaving it on the table. but it is, we're leaving it with people whose money it rightfully is, who earn that.
Well, keep in mind, the United States government doesn't have a taxing problem, they have a spending problem. And until we fix the spending problem, that's the real issue here. And when you talk about taxes, this is another factual statement. It was already, I was at a hearing, a discussion like this, and PolitiFact already attested to this. 97%, the top 50% pay 97% of the income taxes already. So when you're starting to talk about taxes, these are factual information coming out of the IRS. And then you also made the comment that people in Congress, it's usually not the Republicans. It's the other side that believes we should tax more.
Right.
Can I add to that? I would like to, the opposing point to that argument is that internet is new, but the idea of catalog sales and intrastate sales have always been done. And if you buy out of state, you don't get taxed. And it's always been done, mail order, Sears, throughout history. So what does the internet change? The internet doesn't change only the mode of ordering stuff from other companies out of state. Why should they see that as an opportunity to add, why would the federal government see that as an opportunity to add a tax onto sales between states?
Right. Well, the interesting thing, and now I know what you're talking about, that's a usage tax. That's already on the books. The states already have that. The problem that occurs, if that was your question, now I understand what you're asking. You have a sales tax for things within the state. When you buy something from outside the state, there's a usage tax. The problem is there's no enforcement on you paying it. But when you buy something from out of state, you technically owe a usage tax to the state of Ohio. That's a state law. The problem is there's never been a way to figure out how to collect that. So that, if that's the bill you're talking about, there is a bill in Congress that's starting to pick up a little bit of momentum, and that is because it's interstate commerce. That what they're asking the federal government to do is look at ways to enforce the state's ability to collect the usage tax when they buy something from out of state.
But then, do you agree with that? Should the federal government get into that business of enforcing state law?
They're not asking to enforce it. They're talking about an interstate transaction, and that is one of the things the federal government should get involved with interstate, any commerce over the interstate. So that's what we have to look at. But I'm not saying how I believe or disagree or agree on the bill. I'm just telling you I think that's maybe what you were asking. That's what the bill. There is a bill out there that people are talking about, and it's really the collection of the tax, the state tax, that now is not able to be collected because the state of Ohio doesn't have the authority to monitor or monitor the sale of something from out of state. That's why they want the federal government to take a look at it. I'm not saying what my position is on that yet. I'm just telling you that's out there right now. Okay.
Congressman Renacci has an important call to take in 3 minutes at 8 o'clock, so I would like all of you to give him a warm round of applause.